Every economic report that's been coming out in the last month has been pushing us towards expansion and strength. I mean, we just had a blowout jobs number on Friday, 228,000 jobs. It was 50% higher than was predicted. So again, there's cognitive dissonance between what the media is saying, want us to push us into recession, and what's actually happening.
And that's White House senior trade counselor Peter Navarro on Sunday Morning Futures yesterday with Jackie on the importance of President Trump's tariffs in bringing jobs and manufacturing back to America. Byrna Technologies is a company creating less lethal alternatives to firearms, including shoulder-fired launchers, irritant rounds, and sprays. It serves both everyday consumers and security professionals. 81% of production done in the United States, with plans to go to 90% within the next few months. Joining me now is the CEO of Byrna, Bryan Ganz. And Bryan, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. I know you've been hiring more American workers, even through these tariffs. Tell us about the impact of these tariffs on your business, even as much of it, the majority, is done in America.
Well, Maria, first off, thank you very much for having me on. Let me start by saying that I am a supporter of the use of tariffs. Yep. At the time of the president's election in November, 100% of our production was here in the U.S., but only 31% of our supply chain was here in the U.S. And we knew these tariffs were coming. So since that period of time, we have moved from 31% of our supply chain in the U.S. to yesterday, it was 92% of the supply of our iconic Byrna SD launcher and 87% of the supply chain of our new Byrna CL launcher. So this is a significant move. Now, I will tell you, it is not without cost. Moving this 62% to the U.S. has probably raised our cost by 14%. On the other hand, had we not done this, our cost would have gone up by 30%. So this has been a smart move. We've been able to bring our supply chain back to the U.S., which, although there's higher hard costs, there are actually lower soft costs. We don't have to deal with the issues of importing. We don't have to deal with, problems with strikes at the port or labor problems. And we're working with American companies where we have a much tighter control over our supply chain. So I think we are somewhat the poster child of what American business can do and should do with these tariffs that are being imposed.
Good for you, Bryan. You did a great job there. How long did that take? You say that it cost 14% higher, and what are you expecting in terms of those costs over the long term? Do those expenses come down? And how long was the process to move more of that supply chain to America, Bryan?
That's a great question, Maria. I mean, we were in somewhat of a unique position, I think. In 2020, during the pandemic, only 11% of our supply chain was domestic. And as a result, we had severe supply chain interruptions. The factory was shut down more than it was open, to be honest with you. It was devastating for the company and for our employees. At that point, I instructed the management team to go to what we call an all-truck strategy. So there are 114 parts in each launcher. I wanted to make sure that there was redundant supply, that at least one supplier was able to deliver by truck. So in other words, was in the USMCA. And we qualified a lot of U.S. suppliers. I would happily say that fortunately, very little was in Mexico or Canada. Almost everything was in the U.S. But because these suppliers were qualified, because they were already producing a small amount for Byrna, because they were already running Byrna molds, we were able to very, very quickly ramp up our U.S. production and dial down our overseas production because we had already taken these steps to have U.S. suppliers.
Yeah, very, very important points that you make. Let me bring in Mike Lee. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, look, it seems to me that what you're saying is probably happening throughout the entire country. Have you gotten any feedback from your suppliers that are domestic as to how their business is doing? And I feel like there's a bit of a multiplier effect here that's going to happen domestically to a lot of companies like you that are ahead of the eight ball, as well as the people in your supply chain.
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. And I have to say, I was somewhat surprised that the cost increase was not greater. I think that a lot of companies like Byrna have been building up capacity in anticipation of these tariffs. We recently moved 13 critical machine parts from Thailand here to the U.S. with basically no increase in cost. There were a number of our U.S. suppliers that were very anxious for this business. So I think there's somewhat of a virtuous cycle here. As more supply demand comes to the U.S., more of these vendors in the U.S. are ramping up their production in anticipation. So I would expect to see our costs actually come down as this virtuous cycle takes effect.
Bryan, you say the tariffs on China are still too low. You know, I have reason to feel like a lot of this tariff conversation and this agenda is largely about China and their bad behavior to the United States. What is your assessment of these tariffs on China? And, you know, when you look at the overall tariff plan on China, you're talking about close to 70% tariffs.
Yeah, look, Maria, the problem with China is not just the tariffs. It is also what the administration refers to as these non-tariff barriers. So we are the leading company globally in the manufacture of non-lethal guns, but there are a lot of smaller competitors nipping at our ankles, and the vast majority of these products are made in China. Now, they're made in China of inferior materials, inferior quality. We, of course, test everybody else's launchers. You know, these generally fail within, a couple hundred shots of being used. These are products that are not allowed to be sold in China, yet they're made in China to be dumped here in the U.S. There is one example of a competitor that is selling their product for less than it cost us to make the product here in the U.S. That's just wrong. I mean, that's exactly what these tariffs are designed to prevent.
And therein lies the issue. Thank you for encapsulating this issue in one item there, Bryan. Where does the growth come from at the company? Let's call it the next 3 years.
Well, one of the things that we were either smart or lucky on is our launchers have been built in the U.S. since 2020, but our ammunition was still built in South Africa. Since November, we made the decision to shutter our South African factory and move all of the equipment to the U.S., which was a great move because South Africa now has a 30% tariff. But as a result of that, our U.S. employment has gone from less than 100 under the Biden administration to over 200 today. And I know we're not a big company, but it's still 100 people.
That's a very good point. That's exactly what President Trump wants to see. Bryan, thank you.